Sean.
You're welcome.
Yay! Yay!
See your red lights, so we must be on.
Feeding America, I think that would be good.
You take a picture, you can take a picture and send it to them.
Weird, but that's. Yeah, so. Being a startup church, that's.
Puts the count into double digits.
Yeah. He said,
Information that
So I'll put a reduction of save and there's 3 topics.
Can I sit here with you, dear?
Of course. Yeah.
Oh, you were Carol was gonna do a. My turn. You write your name on the.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I always thought it was.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it.
Oh, you're okay. All right. Then start it.
That's it.
Gotta wait till there's.
Oh, do I
You
have?
ready?
Down.
Well, no, I'm happy
We've got
to.
one more.
I
for
let
the
them see that word
Okay.
is. Can you write down the music? Of course.
Okay.
There was such a beautiful music in the beginning. I know I'm looking back. Perfect. Yeah.
You put in all this work,
I just enjoy it. I don't think.
I'm just kidding.
So now the teammate to choose it.
Okay, everyone, thank you all for coming. Thank you for coming for our informational meeting. We have Pastor Tom is going to say a few words, and then we have Ryan Bashore, who is going to walk us through the final process. And we'll have times for questions and answers, and we're hoping to keep this around an hour. So here we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Well, good morning again. You've heard my voice enough today, but you got to endure it for just a little bit longer. If I tail off on a sentence, since I don't have a microphone on me now, just do this, wad up your paper, throw it at me, whatever, okay? It'll work, okay? The purpose of this information, you're probably wondering, why are we having 2 weeks in a row where we're getting together? Today is about information about what next week is going to be. There'll be 3 votes next week, 3 votes. And we're going to walk through that today, and you're going to have opportunity to ask questions. It's not that you won't have the opportunity to ask questions next week, but if we get a lot of the questions answered today, or there's another question, it'll minimize our time next week for a congregational meeting. And that's really the goal, okay? We want to give ample time if you have a question or a thought or that you want to share, to be able to share that, okay? So when Sean said we're hoping to keep this to no more than an hour, if you have something burning to ask, we're not going to shut you down either for that, okay? I'm going to introduce to you here Ryan Bashore. It's he and his dad. His dad lives up in Northern Cal, or Central, right there on.
He's north of Sac, so he's northern.
Okay, Northern Cal, yeah. Okay, and they're the company that put together that incredible report. I have a paper copy of that. Council members do have electronic copies of that, and you certainly are welcome to ask them If you're looking for reading material, if you're having a hard time sleeping, whatever it is, but there's pertinent information there on that property report. We're grateful for the Shores and for the detail in which they provided that report in it. There's about a 70-page base report, and then there's a bunch of documents, all kinds of documents. In fact, copies of deeds and everything that are there, everything pertaining to the property. And are you aware, are there any charter members here, original members?
There is one, but she's in a home. Her name is Anne Morandi.
Okay.
And also Gwen Burke. And Gwen Burke.
In Glenburg, okay. So the original property was gifted to the congregation by, I think it was the ELC then, whatever predecessor church body like the ELCA before the mergers. It was well, there was ALC, LCA, but there's one before that. And it was gifted to this church for the price of $1. So the land that you sit on here today was gifted at that time. Of course, it's worth a lot more than $1 today. And when we get to the distribution of assets, your council has done an incredible job in thinking through possibilities there. And we'll talk about that shortly. I also want to give a hats off to all the council members for their work and for their time and their energy. This is a lot of time. And I really, really want to thank Sean back there, who's the lightning rod, catching everything, you know? And every congregation needs a lightning rod. And one thing that I found out when I was a parish pastor, especially in Fullerton, when I was there for 19, 20 years, we had some fabulous mountaintop experiences, and we had some incredibly down in the valley experiences. But the one thing that I was always grateful for, and I believe this is a Holy Spirit thing, and that is that the council members were the right council members at the time to deal with the issues at hand. And I think you've got that here with your council, and in particular with your council president. So thank you. Thank you very much. Let Ryan say a few words about, and then we'll just work through one of the three topics at a time, and I'll give you some time after each one for some questions.
Okay, so for those who I have not met in the past, my name is Ryan Bashore. I'm a real estate broker. I'm a contractor. I'm an attorney. I only work with churches and nonprofits. I don't want to say only. 99% of my clients are churches and nonprofits. My father is also a real estate broker and a certified general appraiser. So that report that Tom referenced is basically anything and everything that has to do with your physical real property here. Starting with the corporation, making sure that everything's in good standing with the state of California, the Franchise Tax Board, the Secretary of State, all the way down to the city as far as property taxes, conditional use permits, your zoning, and what can be done on the property, what's allowed on the property, and what is on the property. So that report, basically, the gist of it is about 70 pages, and the rest is supporting documentation that has to do with zoning codes, conditional use permits, leases, kind of the whole kit and caboodle. So the idea behind that is to get a good grasp of everything you have here and what's allowed here by rights. And that becomes important when it comes down to the value of your property. So location, 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 you've probably all heard that before. But the key to location is not necessarily what street you're on, but what zoning you're sitting on. So every city has zoning codes based what you're allowed to do by right. So if you live in a house, chances are your zoning underneath your house is single family residential. If you're in an apartment, it's probably multifamily residential, all the way up to commercial and industrial. Churches, well, religious use in general kind of falls in a bubble. Some cities have codes that allow it by right. Other cities say, oh, you can do it if you get approval via a conditional use permit. So this particular church is actually sitting on single family residential land, but you do have a conditional use permit that allows you to be here by rights. So back in the day, and I say that because I don't remember the dates precisely, but back when the church opened, I believe it was in the 50s. Somebody went to the city and said, we want to put a church on this corner. Here's a footprint of what we want to be here, building wise, occupancy wise, our vision. And it goes through the entire process just like it would if you were building a house, with the exception that you have to deal with parking restrictions, traffic. Obviously, every Sunday you add traffic to the streets here, all the way up to how many people can sit in your building. And when you guys did the remodel in the church, you basically updated the old conditional use permit. And that's really more for occupancy. And what it really comes down to for the city is they want continuity across the city, as far as they don't want a warehouse sitting in the middle of a single family neighborhood. Just like they don't want churches necessarily in a commercial shopping center or next to a grocery store, but they want it in residential neighborhoods. But there's always caveats and exceptions to all that. So, broad overview, I'm here to answer any questions you may have. Ranging from what does this mean via state law and the corporation, all the way down to what do we do with the tables and chairs. So over the years, I don't want to say I've seen it all because I get surprised constantly, but I've seen a lot of different scenarios with a lot of different churches and congregations. So I may not have an exact experience to answer a question, but I can kind of put two and two together and come up with a reasonable response that may or may not answer your question. I do answer hypotheticals, but I answer hypothetical questions with hypothetical answers. It's a little hard without knowing, down and dirty facts, but I try. When it comes to the synod and assets and things like that, I can answer general questions regarding what the law says regards to nonprofits and religious use. Tom can answer better how the synod handles things and accounting and all that sort of stuff. So kind of between the two of us, we can probably get everything covered for you. And there's a good chance between now and next week we'll come up with more questions, and we'll deal with it and answer questions how we can. So I don't know what the easiest format is. If anybody has any generic questions right off the bat, we can start. And if that triggers somebody else's question, we'll just go around the room.
I know one of the first meetings with Pastor Tom, we talked about our desire, of course, to sell the property to another church. And then I believe since then I've heard discussions, and I'm not authority on anything, I'm just talking word of mouth what I've heard, that if we sold other to, not to another church, okay, if we sold any of a private party, then they can sell it to anybody. Of course, it has to fit within the codes of the city, but what are the real rules there? If we really wanted to stick to selling this property to another church, I think Tom indicated that would take a lot longer than having it open to, what other sorts of things could come into a residential?
There's a lot to unpack there. So I'll start with, say, a developer. So a developer, this is going to mean the most to a developer in today's market, just with prices being what they are. So a developer has to build based on the code and what the city. So I mentioned this with single family R1, but within the city of Riverside, there's different tiers to that based on lot sizes. So the way this is zoned, it's zoned for, I believe it's 13,000 square foot lots. Most cities, the average single family home lot is like 7,200, 7,500 square foot lots. But that's what's allowed by right. So in other words, if a developer went in today and said, I want to build houses here, I'm going to stick with the minimum and maximum confines of zoning for square footage, for height requirements, for streets, for all these sorts of things, the city's going to say, okay, you're within the right. Have a nice day. Then the only thing the developer has to do is submit a subdivision plan to show this is where the lots will be, this is where the streets will be, all, basically, if you've driven into a subdivision and you see all these little cookie cutter houses, they had to go to the city and say, here's a plan of what we're going to build. So that's the easiest scenario for a developer. But they all go in and ask for variances and changes and bonus densities and all these sorts of things. So for a developer, it's all about maximizing profit. 13,000 square foot lot is not a lot of profit. If they could get a variance or they go to the city and ask for a bonus density by saying, okay, by right, we can put 6 properties here at 13,000 square foot. You allow us to drop that down to 10,000. We can get 2 more lots on here. We'll make those 2 lots affordable housing and sell those at a reduced price. But they're now making more per lot on the other original, I don't even remember what I said, 6 lots, whatever my hypothetical was. So all that takes time. So a developer is gonna go and make application to the city to do all these lot splits. They're gonna submit what's called the tentative tract map. That's the civil plans, the street plans, the sewer, all the infrastructure you would need. It's gotta go to public hearing, because this is assuming, of course, they're not asking to change anything, which they will. So assuming they're gonna ask to change to get smaller lots in them. Public hearing, you have the right to go for the planning commission, say yay, nay, whatever your grievance is. And the planning commission, let's just say they approve it, then there's an appeal period. Then it goes to city council, same process with the city council. You have a chance to appeal it and make your voice heard. All of that takes about a year. And then the developer is gonna come in and ask for more time, because COVID slows things down. They want their final tract map, not their tentative. So I've been seeing developments right now at the fastest close in about 18 months. Most developers are asking for more and more extensions and time to deal with things, and I've seen them go as long as 3 years. So you take a risk with a developer. And a developer will work, they'll give you a deposit up front, but you're not gonna see anything else for, say, 2 years down the road. But that's your prerogative if you wanna go with a developer. Taking from what I gathered from your question, if you wanted to stay, we wanna stick to a church. That's within your right. So you're not obligated to accept any offer you receive. An offer is literally just an offer. And you're in the position to either accept that offer, counter that offer, or say, no, thank you, we're just not interested. And that's your prerogative. You as a church have different rights and abilities than, say, you do as a private individual selling your house. So as a church body, your bylaws and all that, and all require certain approvals and steps and everything to be taken. So it's not like husband and wife sits down and goes, do we want to sell the house for $500,000? Yes, sign the dotted line, send it off to escrow, and we're done with it. Far more steps, far more checks and balances. So you have a lot of opportunity along the way to, I'll use the term kibosh the deal, simply because either you don't like the price or you don't want to sell it to whoever it is. You also have, I'll call it legal discrimination. So you have some abilities as a church that you don't have as an individual. So I'll use the example of, if the church doctrine says you cannot have a female pastor, and a female pastor applies for a job, and you turn them down, and so they turn around and sue you for discrimination. Their case won't hold up because your religious doctrine says we don't employ females in ministerial roles. So it's a non-issue. So it's technically discrimination because you denied her because she's a woman, but because you have this doctrinal, then it kind of changes things. So you kind of sit in that role with the church body as well when it comes to who you sell it to. So if, like, I've had churches come to me and say, we don't want to sell to developers, and we don't want to sell to name your cult or name your whoever. There's some ways to deal with it, but you're walking a tightrope. So you do have some control over that. I've had churches basically say, look, we know the developer will give us $5 million for the property. We want to sell to another church, so we'll sell it for $1 million less so a church can have it, because we don't want to see it torn down. But to get to the crux of your question, once you've sold it to Bob can do whatever he wants with the property. You can't, there's nothing you can do to stop.
Sell it.
Yeah, so if you sell it to the Church of Bob, he turns around and sells it to the developer. You can't, it's not yours, you can't do anything about it. So it makes it a little more complicated. So, sorry, that was a really small answer.
But we had a church in San Diego that was up for sale for quite a while. For sure, we're handling that one too. They handle our sales with the Senate. And there was a church in LA. The sacrament was marijuana. It was a religious entity.
Okay.
The church sat right across the street from an elementary school. So, I don't have the authority to say yay or nay. So I took it to the Synod Council knowing what they were gonna say. And the Synod Council said, we don't wanna be the headlines in San Diego the next day, regarding that. So, we can't say no.
We handle it internally, like we have ways and means to sway buyers, for lack of a better term. So they went away.
I can ask one other question, then I'll shut up. But financially, how long are we committed to upkeeping this property? If we turn it over to you or the Synod, then do you help with the upkeep? I mean, we've got yard people and we've got our renters and it all.
So my role, if we're gonna go this route, and using me, so I also do property management for churches. So honestly, take care of it. Like there's nothing you need to worry about. There will be issues that come up from time to time. Who's
Plumbing,
who's the gardener? I don't have a gardener's phone number. Who does it? Things like that are all kind of logistical things. But as far as physical, somebody coming down here and fixing a leak, nothing you guys need to worry about. The only thing that is helpful for like people who live in the neighborhood, they drive by and go, oh, hey, we noticed the church has got graffiti on it.
Yeah.
And to let me know so I can get it taken care of, because I'm not going to drive by every day. But between myself and Tom, we'll take care of the tenants, we'll take care of the physical property. So the idea is to make it as easy and less burdensome as possible.
Thank you, that helps.
I know it's for single family buildings. Can an apartment building be built?
I don't want to say no, because anybody can go ask for a zone change. So the way the code is written right now, no. But a developer can go ask for a zone change and literally change the underlying zoning of the property, which is, it's public hearing. It's like if you've ever seen like notice of hearing on like a telephone pole or something, somebody's trying to change something that they're not allowed to do by right under the existing laws. So they've petitioned the city to change it. Somebody would have to do the same thing here. So I don't know if it's possible. It depends on the city, what the city wants. Based on what's around you, they're probably not going to support it. So they kind of look at if this was all apartments around you and this was a single family, they would most likely change it because they want the conformity in the neighborhood. So I don't think it's likely, but I don't want to say it's not possible.
The odds are though, that the city would love to see this become a property tax paying piece of land.
Yeah.
What did you say?
So they do get property taxes more from residential than they do from you. So yes, they want money. Plus whoever makes that application, that's just to submit an application to the city, they've already committed themselves to at least probably $50,000 in fees to the city for everybody reviewing the documents, the fire department reviewing the documents, the traffic engineer. It's money for the city. It's just like when you pull a permit. You pull a permit for a roof. What does it cost the city to come out and inspect the roof? Not a lot. It's pure profit for them. Well, almost pure profit. Yes.
I was just gonna throw in something. I live in the Victoria Hills area, and there's no apartment buildings within shouting distance.
Yeah.
But the city chose to put 200 condos on a piece of land. So that this can't be done, that's what the council wants to do.
Yeah, it all comes down to how loud is the city. So unless you live within, I think Riverside's a 500-foot radius. So if there was something to happen to this property, somebody say goes and submits for a zone change, they have to notice a 500-foot radius around the property to all the property owners. Well, if none of you live within that radius, you're not going to know unless you happen to be tracking the city website and seeing what's going on with agendas and things like that. So you might not ever find out. So if you live within that radius and somebody posted that notice that they wanted to do those condos, you'd find out real quick. And usually what happens is if somebody finds out, they spread the word to everybody else. And then the idea is you show up at the planning commission meeting to make your voice heard. You have to use buzzwords when you go to those meetings. People like to go and say, oh, it's gonna be ugly, or it's gonna be, and they talk emotion and cosmetics, but you've gotta get down to the underlining what effect it has on the infrastructure, and you have to use buzz, they don't care. That's what it comes down to, because they want the tax dollars.
There are apartments not far from here, just before Target on the right.
Right, and so every city's a little different, so they might look on a broader radius to see what's around here, but they're gonna look directly across the street
Mhm.
and see all single family, they're gonna look up this street and see single family,
Mhm.
and then they're gonna see there's a school right here.
That's
So
good.
that school's probably gonna be a help in keeping this density down, but again, you never know.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am?
How is that school zoned?
I don't know, to be honest, I never looked up the school zoning.
Okay, so do schools have their own special zoning?
Not, usually yes, but not always. So it's usually an institutional zoning, because once it's a public school, the odds of it being something else are slim to none. So it just depends on how old that is. This was probably all agriculture, I'm guessing, at some point, but I don't know, I never looked up the school to see what its zoning was. So I can't answer that. Yes, sir.
The school across the street has no parking lot, use our parking lot
Yes.
here. Do you think the school district would be interested in buying the property?
It is a distinct possibility. So I can tell you, it's always better to what's the bird in the hand, two in the bush. So I always start with existing tenants when it comes to selling property, because there's a good chance a tenant's always gonna be interested. Whether or not they can afford is another story. And then I start looking at what else we've got. So not only are they a tenant, but they're a neighbor. And in the grand scheme of things, they're probably the most logical buyer, other than another church, if you don't want to go the development route. But I can tell you, selling to a governmental entity falls somewhere between selling to another church and selling to a developer. So there's bureaucracy involved. So because they would be buying the property with taxpayer money, they have to jump through hoops that you wouldn't have to go through as an individual. So the biggest issue they've got is they have to go get an appraisal. And it's gotta be a certified general appraiser, which is fine, it's their dime, but they can't purchase the property for a single dollar more than what that appraisal is. So if the appraisal comes in at $1 million, they're gonna say, we'd be happy to buy it, but we're only buying it for $1 million. There's some hoops they can go through to try to get that bumped up and changed a little bit, but not if it's that far off, they're not gonna come up much. There's ways we can get around that by saying, look, let's go get another appraisal and meet you in the middle if we know it's way off. But if they get an appraisal and it's at a price that is in range, okay, sure, no problem. We'd be happy to sell to you. You know their money's good. Your money. But they still have to go, they've got to go through board meetings and all those sorts of things to dot their I's to make sure it's done properly. So on average, depending on how quickly they're having board meetings, 6 to 9 months, versus a church is probably less than 6 months and a developer is more than 9 months easy. So it depends. But they would be a logical buyer.
Could it be sold and be used like as a community center?
It could. So here's where it gets interesting. So going back to the original zoning. So if it was a city operated community center, it would be much easier, because that would require a conditional use permit under the existing zoning, because a community center is not permitted by right in single family zoning. But if the city buys it, it's much easier for the city to get the conditional use permit for themselves. So if, let's say, for example, so the school tenant you have here now, let's say they want to purchase this and they want to expand and have, 200 students here. They would have to go in and make application for a whole new conditional use permit, because that's not how this property was designed to be used. So anything is possible. Any buyer who knows what they're doing, they're sophisticated, will say, we will buy your property for X on the condition that our conditional use permit gets approved. Because if they say the school buys it and they want to put 200 students in here, but they don't get a conditional use permit, now they bought a property that they don't have a right to occupy. It doesn't do them any good. So it depends. So the most logical buyer, honestly, is another church, because they can move in here by right because of the conditional use permit that's in place. So the odd caveat with conditional use permits, if they go unused for 6 months, they're gone. They disappear. You have to reapply for it. So it doesn't have any effect in this instance because we've got the Anglican Church. As long as religious worship is going on here, once every 6 months, the clock starts over again. So every Sunday, you guys worship here, clock starts again. So it's a non-issue to worry about for us. So it's kind of you probably heard something being grandfathered in. So that's basically what it is, but that grandfathered in has that 6 month kind of ticking time bomb that's always going to be sitting there. But it makes the most sense because the conditional use permit, it runs with the land, if you've ever heard that expression. It doesn't belong to you as the church, it belongs to the land. So as long as a church is worshiping here and abides by the conditional use permit, a church can always worship here.
So if the property became vacant from a civic perspective, we would ask the conference of churches that are in this particular conference. Pastor Linda Brown is the dean of the conference over at Eden, to hold their conference meeting here at least a couple times a month, to be on site, have a devotion, have some worship time together as conference leaders to keep that clock. Yeah.
So you would do that's something we would then know is gonna happen?
You wouldn't even, it would just take place. It wouldn't need to be anything. So as long as, say, the Anglican Church is here as a tenant, it's a non-issue. If they were to move out, then something like that would get instituted. And to be honest, as long as it happened once every 6 months, and as long as a prayer took place, it's not in the city's purview to question what religious use is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not their, I'll give you a good example. The IRS, when it comes to First Amendment and religious use, they don't question what your religious belief is. All they ask you is it a firmly held religious belief? Yes? Good, you're good to go. Because it's not their position to judge what counts as religious use and what doesn't. So as long as we're here and we're having a meeting and we say a prayer, my conscience is good and the city's not going to question it. So, but it's nothing. I mean, we wouldn't send out a phone call and say, hey, we all need to have church here next Sunday. That wouldn't happen. So we would take care of it all right.
I'd like to shift to those 3 questions now that you're going to be asked next week for approval. The first one is kind of in this same realm of some of the questions you've had now. We are going to come and request of you, your council is coming to request of you, an authorization for the Pacifica Synod to list the property on your behalf and handle the sale. Okay? That will help alleviate your worries about having to maintain the property and all of that stuff. And it wouldn't be something you would have to take care of. The reason why we're coming with that, and the reason why closure is coming so quickly, really, in a lot of ways at the end of March, your leadership is tired. They're worn out. They are worn out. So what happens, well, with the third proposal I'll get to in a minute, but with the sale of property, that what we would do then is enter in on your behalf a contract with the Bashores on listing and selling the property. Okay? So that would be the first motion to take place next week. Okay? Any questions on that? It's pretty straightforward. The second question has to do with the paper that was just shown to you, that you have in front of you, and it's about the distribution of assets of the property. This is a list that council has developed, okay? Tomorrow we meet and we're gonna work on some percentages, okay? We can't put fixed amounts because we don't know when the property sells what it's gonna sell for, okay? We have a formula at the Synod office that works this way. 10% of any property sale will go to the ELCA, okay? And that's also an acknowledgement that the gift of this land was from a predecessor of mine, okay? 20% will go to the Senate to help with mission funding and other things that we do in the Senate. So that's 30%. The last 70%, you have first opportunity to make a request of the City Council for that distribution. And the list that's here is River of Hope. That's where Pastor Tim Edmondson is. Little update on Pastor Tim. They are in the process right now. In fact, we have them working with the Shores on developing their own incorporation. This in the coming months, shortly, they will be spinning off to become their own ELCA ministry. They've been under the umbrella of Hope Palm Desert to this point, and so they're going to spin off, become their own congregation. We have a goal with them from we're their fiscal agent in the Senate office in terms of grants and stuff. That March 1st, we're hoping to make that switch over to River of Hope handling their own finances and not depending on Hope, Palm Desert, and us to do that. So they're moving in a progressive way. The ministry is doing better than holding its own. Okay, they have about 90 people in that ministry, and they have the financial footing to, it's kind of like a teenager who turned 18 and
Give them the boot.
there you go. And we feel they have a great success possibility. But knowing that Pastor Tim in particular is close to your hearts, your council has just asked to put them on this list. Okay? Feeding America, another huge ministry here. I have had a little contact with both Pastor Kent and Pastor Linda. I think there is a strong desire there to slowly move that in that direction. They're hoping that there's still a core group of people here who will help with this in the meantime, and even transition to them helping, but it is a high priority, so they're on this list as well. They're the only religious, well, there's two non-religious entities on here. Feeding America is one of them, but they are a nonprofit. Okay? I'm going to group 3 and 4 together because the gift would actually go to LRCC, Lutheran Retreats and Conference Center. It doesn't have to be an equal amount, but the gift would be to LRCC. There are 2 camps. There's Luther Glen, and then there is El Camino Pines. How many of you remember when it was called Uligua? Yeah. I worked there for 3 summers, and it was Uligua. It's like I went to California Lutheran College. My diploma says college. Now it's a university. So Uligua, you remember what that means? Anybody know what Uligua meant? Youth living Jesus' way. That's how it got to be Uligua. So Luther Glen and El Camino Pines, again, it is a religious entity. Scholarships for seminary students. You're mindful that ministry needs are big, and people, ministry, back in the 60s, the church paid for every seminarian who went to church or went to seminary. Not anymore, and there are seminarians, by the time they finish their undergrad work, they're coming out with $50,000, $75,000, even $100,000 in debt. So scholarships are an important piece there.
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
With this problem in the nation of not only our church, but other denominations, if they had some scholarship program or some other way to finance it, wouldn't they have more pastors? Isn't that part of the problem?
That would be one layer of the challenge, of the headwind. Yes. Probably the biggest headwind, and this is my own personal opinion, there's no scientific fact, but in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, clergy were the butt ends of every joke on TV, media, and the whole 9 yards. And it didn't lift up the profession. And then we had the scandals throughout the religious world that didn't help.
No, I know it's the proper church.
And then the final piece in that is just simply wages versus the ability to live and support a family And we have many scenarios now where bivocational work is almost a necessity, where they work part-time in the parish, part-time in the world, to make ends meet.
The Lutheran church I went to before this one, the pastor, his entire time was, he ran a mental health clinic for the county of LA, and he was a pastor. He was there for 48 years.
God bless him, because I can only imagine did he ever shut his brain off when he went home at night? You know?
No, I don't think he did, because he did family counseling on top of it.
Okay, yeah. Okay. LSS is a social service agency, that's Lutheran Social Services. And they are at, LSS now runs Central City Lutheran Mission. They did at the beginning, and then it moved through different bodies, and it's now come back full circle to LSS and other places. I'm sure there are offices here in Riverside County.
Is it still connected to the schools? When I was teaching in Poly High School, we had a special program for Riverside Against Drugs, and those support groups. And if we had a kid who needed some extra help or a family that did, we brought them to the social services here.
I couldn't speak directly to that, but LSS certainly is involved in that way in schools. Again,
They help people find counseling on a level, because we weren't counselors.
they would be classified as an SMO in the church, a social ministry agency. Now, they're their own entity, but they work with all stripes of Lutherans, not just ELCA, but also Missouri Synod and that. And by the way, the Missouri Synod Church close by here is up for sale as well. And that would be the church body that wouldn't let women be.
I knew about that already.
Yeah.
That's where my example comes from.
Which church is it, you know,
The name escapes me, I'd have to look it
I know
up.
where it is?
Yeah, I don't think it's too far from here. Yeah,
I think it's on Arlington.
yeah,
I think it's up around.
yeah.
You gotta put that in your report. This is the wood that corrects.
Trinity and Eden are, of course, the two neighboring churches here in Riverside. And it's always great to see that thoughtfulness of supporting ministries in your area and in your context here in Riverside. That's not always the case, okay? We don't always play well together. I'm sad to say. And part of that is because sometimes these churches have started because they got mad at the other church and a group of them left and they went and started another church. And some of that bad will is, well, I'm a big believer in the original DNA of the church, and that original DNA does not just disappear like it does. We just hope it doesn't surface and rear its ugly head. So those are the ones that are listed there. Next week when we come together, you will have percentages. If you have a thought of something that you would like the council to add to this list, you can share that today. Share it with Sean. Yes.
Lutheran Office of Public Policy.
Okay.
I've served on the policy council for a number of years, and it's been several years since our congregation has contributed to LTP.
What's
What
it
was that
called?
again, Larry? I'm sorry.
Lutheran Office of Public Policy.
Yeah, you've been very active in that in the past, I remember.
It's a very strong organization within the ELCA. It has we have an office in Sacramento. There's offices in Sacramento, Washington, DC, New York, and there's 4 or 5 offices, I think, across the country. And it is a strong beast. I was going to have the Lutheran gift planner in our area come to talk, but you have a solid list. You're not wrestling with what you want. So we don't need to do that. Lisa's an incredible woman who does great work, but you've done great work because of your faithfulness on your own. So if you would add that for tomorrow.
I added it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Mhm.
What is it called?
Lutheran Office of Public Policy.
I would like to put on Olive Crest. It's a nonprofit for battered women.
Okay,
I
Olive
don't know
Crest.
if
support kids in foster care also, families in general in the area.
families, yeah,
What's the name of it again?
Olive Crest.
Olive Crest.
Got it on the list, okay.
They're a Christian organization. They're a Christian organization.
Yeah,
Also.
and they're really, I would like to.
They meet with, Lutheran Office of Public Policy meets with legislatures and all of the things to help influence,
This is one of
Bills.
the ideas of it.
you know, all those lobbyists that vote for their own interests. Lutheran Office of Public Policy is a lobbyist group for other people's interests. Okay, so Olive Crest, any others? And I want to be mindful that if we get the list too long, then the level of dollars will be minimized. And remember that this is what will be divided out of 70%. So let's say we have $1 million at the end. I'm just using easy rounding numbers. $1 million at the end. These entities will split up 700,000. Okay? We're not a crystal ball to know what that number is going to be. But I think we'll have more than $1 million to work with when it's all
I would
said
think
and
so,
done.
because houses in my neighborhood are like $700,000 now, let alone a church with all these buildings and everything else.
The thing is it's not illogical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to compare house sales to properties like this. But it all comes down to comparables. So it's real easy to compare a single family house to a single family house. But when it comes to a property like this, it's really churches to churches. Because if you're looking at houses to this, it's apples to oranges. But it is, as the residential market goes up, that it's not the house value that goes up, it's the land value. So the land value in general is going up. So yes, absolutely. Yeah, Sean.
Well, two things. And I don't know if this applies, but one is it's only worth what you can sell it for,
True.
bottom line. Second, how long does the Synod give us, or how long is the Synod gonna wait to sell? I mean, are you gonna hold off?
Well, it's biblical for us to know that there's a fair wage for a fair labor. I think we can translate that. We want a fair market value, but we'll follow the guidance. I mean, we've had scenarios like the church in San Diego that was on the market for a long time that we had to lower the price, but it was a different type of, even church to church, it was a different scenario. That was a first unit.
It didn't have a lot of seating. It had a small parking lot. And it was not, there was no conditional use permit. That was a property that was literally grandfathered in because the zoning and everything had changed underneath it. So anybody who bought it could not expand. They couldn't do, it was, here it is. Take it or leave it. I mean, there was nothing they could do with it. So it was literally trying to find a needle in a haystack. And they didn't have classrooms. It was great for a small beginner church, and that was about it. But every single church that came through said, great, so we can expand. No.
And then there were also a handful of offers where the buyers didn't have the means of what they were offering.
Well, so every church who's going to be interested in buying this property will say, but we're a church. You got to have some compassion for us. We're a church. Well, who are you buying it from? All of a sudden, they know that compassion's out the door. It's the nature of it. It's just the way it goes. Everybody wants the deal. And like anything, time is money. So say it is a developer and they're going to take 2 years. I would expect that developer to pay more because what's the property worth in 2 years? But at the same time, you've got to take into consideration the developer is going to look at all these buildings and go, what's it going to cost to tear them down? How much asbestos is in it? How much lead paint's in it? And then they're going to say, great, we'll give you this premium because we're not going to close in 2 years, but we got to deal with all this stuff. So now we're kind of right back where we were. Versus a church, I can go for hours on church lending. So if it's a denominational church, they usually have some sort of national banking service that they can get funds from. Like you have Lutheran Church Extension Fund, for example. The Wesleyans have an investment fund. The Catholic Church has their own, so they're internal lending arms. A non-denominational church doesn't have that luxury. So they have to go to places like Evangelical Christian Credit Union, or say a hard money lender. But if they can't go to, well, I don't want to say they can't. Wells Fargo and B of A don't like to lend to churches. It's all stated income, and they don't want to foreclose on God. So they get bonuses with the feds for making loans to nonprofit organizations, but there's so many other nonprofit organizations they can loan to, they don't want to loan to a church. That's just what it comes down to. But the hardest thing for a church to overcome is, say they go to Evangelical Christian Credit Union. They need 30% down. And most churches don't have 30% down. So that leaves them with a hard money lender they might be willing to wheel and deal at less than 10% down, but they're going to charge 10% interest. So now all of a sudden, what's this church going to do? So there will be a lot of church interest, but it may not be churches that are financially capable of doing it. And there will be low balls.
Will there ever come a point where you're like, there's no church that's going to buy this, we have to consider other options, or?
So personally, I don't like to see churches torn down. However, any offer that comes to me, I'm duty bound to present the offer unless it's completely frivolous. So if somebody came in and said, I'll give you $1 for the church, I'm under no obligation legally to give you that offer. But if it's anywhere in the ballpark, regardless of if it's a developer, if it's a cult, if it's the neighbor, here it is, you make that decision because it's not my call. So yes, if a developer does come right off the bat and make an offer, yes, but there's no obligation to go that route right off the bat. I mean, you got to kind of let the market kind of flush itself out and see where things are. It's not like a house where you can have an open house and you've got 3 offers that day and there's a bidding war. It doesn't work that way with churches.
Didn't used to work that way.
Well, it didn't used to, yes. Yes, Sean.
So how do you advertise if you don't put a sign out? How will people know that?
So
It's always a network.
I start with tenants, I expand to neighbors, and I make phone calls. So I keep a running list of every church that has ever called me that is looking in any geographical area, and any church who's ever been interested in either expanding or relocating or what have you. So I go down my list. Hey, we talked last year, you were looking for something in this area. Are you still in the market for it? Because here's a possibility. And I go that route. Then I reach out to denominations. I don't want to say all, but 90% of all major religious denominations has a regional office in the greater Southern California, LA area. I call them and find out if they have any interest or anybody looking. Because what some of them will do, so every denomination works a little different. So for instance, the Church of God, their churches are owned by their regional offices, and then they're entrusted to the local denomination. United Methodist works that way, Wesleyan works that way. So some of what they'll do is the regional office, their synod, they don't obviously don't call it their synod, but their regional office will literally buy the property, and then their local church will handle it. So a lot of times I won't know those local churches who are interested, but the regional office obviously does because they want to put a church plant there or community center, something because they want to get a presence in a particular neighborhood. And then I go to the internet. But I don't put signs out front. I think in the last 20 years I've put up maybe 4 signs, and 3 of those are actually on churches. It doesn't look good. It will hurt your tenants. It gives a bad feeling in the neighborhood. It just doesn't go well. And I don't when I do put things on the internet, I don't advertise addresses. For example, if somebody finds out right now that you're even considering going this route, people will start showing up at your church on Sunday because they know you're here, and they will start showing themselves around your property. So I don't make it known so that doesn't happen. And even if you're not here, your tenant's here, and that's not fair to your tenant. So I don't know. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
Okay, the last question for next week. we'll be asking you for an affirmation of going on synodical administration. You're going to be going on synodical administration one way or the other. We prefer that you affirm that than for us to say, we're going to manage this for you. Therefore, there are two ways for synodical administration. There's synodical preservation and there's synodical administration. A congregation can always ask for synodical administration. In rare cases, the synod does have to step in when the ministry is diminished and cannot operate on its own, that we have to take that role. That's never really popular, okay? Now, might not be a big deal here, but on the 27th of March, you're gonna have your last worship service. Your council is essentially, gonna be dismissed. People are tired and wanna go. So what will happen is the Synod Council will become the council operating Hope Lutheran Church Riverside. The president of the congregation will be Bishop Andy Taylor. Okay? The vice president of the congregation will be the vice president of the synod, which is Nicolette Rohr. Okay? And then the treasurer of the synod will become the financial officer. All your books will be handled through Terry Robertson in the office. She's been made aware that this is going to likely happen. And she's preparing for the big audit for synod right now. And so in early March, once she gets that taken care of, we will be having conversation with your leadership about transferring the financial monies over to the synod. And the synod will put them in a pocket of known for Hope Lutheran Riverside. We will pay the ongoing bills. We will maintain the property. We will do all of that until the property sells. And that. We did talk briefly a little bit at council of the possibility that if the synod wanted to take on the property itself and maybe look for a new start down the road or something of that nature. The difficulty with that is that requires a lot of assets. Okay, we've had area pastors who have heard about it, say, hey, can we turn this into this and turn into that? And I try to explain to them, the money is all wrapped up in the property, and so there isn't necessarily reserved cash to maintain this. So in a lot of ways, the best option, we're not precluding that other option, but the best option is to disperse your assets at your request. Now, when the Synod Council does take it over, the Synod Council now, it's like a new buyer, okay? Ultimately can, say, wait a minute, we don't want the assets to go that way. I'm here to give you the best of my word that I can give you, that if you have a reasonable list, and you have Nicolette Rohr, who has heart for this ministry, the Riverside Ministries. Her dad was a pastor here?
Yes.
Okay. That the Synod Council is going to honor your request. Okay. I'll be very forthcoming. I started in the Synod office in 2017. When I walked in, we were in a lawsuit with a church in Santa Ana. We are still in a lawsuit with the church in Santa Ana because the congregation wanted to take all those assets, and I can't go into detail, and send them to someplace in the Philippines. That's something that the Synod Council is going to go, that makes no sense, no Lutheran presence, no anything, and so that created this anxiety. But that's why we're here to protect the church too. We have an obligation to protect you and the assets. And all of the people who have walked through these halls and these sidewalks and worshiped in this place through the years. So we operate we're asking for your faith in us to do that. If there's a designated person you want us to keep in the loop, we're more than happy to keep you in the loop. My number is, of course, we're changing administrations in a few months, but the Synod Council will remain the same, even if, Bishop Andy will be gone. I'm at the whim of the next bishop and that, but we will operate this in a way that is true to what your wishes were, okay? We have no desire, why would we want to upset people on something that seems very logical, well thought out in that regard?
Let me just throw in for peace of mind. I don't know what you have in the bank. Let's say it's $1,000. And there's a plumbing leak or something along those lines. And obviously whatever funds that are in the bank's not gonna be enough to cover. The synod's at least in a position to say, okay, we'll step up and cover whatever that cost is, and then when it gets sold, they'll get reimbursed. But you at least, you've got Big Brother who has pockets that can help cover those sorts of things. But I mean, if you've got 100,000 in the bank, then you're good for a while. But so there, I mean, there's some peace of mind there that kind of goes with that as well.
And your employees will be treated correctly. You have two, your musician
Yes.
and Vanessa in the office. The others are contracts, they're companies, janitorial service and gardener and that, so we don't, we're not,
Pastor,
yes.
Sorry.
Oh, okay, sounds good. So trust that we're here for you. Okay, we don't desire to be one of your enemies that I preached about today, okay? Hopefully, we all love each other, even if we have a little angst with each other, but we're here to work for you. Our denomination works a little differently than some of the denominations that Ryan said, and you have a lot of say and a lot of control of things, and that's a good thing. Although you were an ALC church, right, originally, or an LCA?
I think ALC.
Yeah, if you're ALC, you have a little more authority. We wish they would have gotten that worked out 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever they happened. But they left a lot behind. So,
I was there when we combined the 3 churches.
yeah, I was in Columbus, Ohio for that service, and I was in seminary. Yeah, and I grew up in Missouri Synod. Sue will say I helped him see the light. So Sue's my spouse. So anyway, she will probably be here on the last worship service. She tends to come with me to those if I'm not dispatched to another congregation. Because you're gonna have the bishop, we're rarely both in the same place at the same time, but we hope to be that day.
Yeah, we're inviting, of course, the Senate, so, if you have a head count, that would be great.
Right. I was asked, I attended the conference meeting the other day to give them an update on Hope and also to share with them that your congregational meetings are your congregational meetings, they're not their congregational meetings. But they asked would we be okay to attend worship. I said, worship is always open.
Yeah.
So you can come and worship. Worship is something that you know, but please don't come to where business is being construed.
Right.
Because it's an anxious moment for everybody in that regard. It's not, doesn't fall under California open meeting rules.
Thank you.
They all keep you in prayer too. Any last questions? We've hit our hour, really, a few minutes over, because we got started at 1:15.
Yeah.
We covered a lot, thank you.
Okay, so next week, we'll have the meeting. The meeting will go as long as you want it to go. It could go 5 minutes, it could go an hour, it could go 5 hours. So it's just those 3 questions are gonna be asked, and we wanted to give you a heads up about them before hearing them for the first time in a week. Hopefully you found this helpful.